Nobody prepares you for the moment your entire past walks through a door you thought was locked forever. It was 3:22 in the morning. Covenant General Hospital, Nashville, Tennessee. The kind of hour where the world feels thin and unreal, where fluorescent lights buzz too loud and every sound seems sharper than it should be. I was gripping the bed rail so hard my knuckles had gone completely white, and somewhere between the second and third contraction of that hour, the door to my delivery room swung open. I looked up. And there he stood. Dr. Cole Whitman, my ex-husband, the man I had loved completely and lost entirely. Standing frozen in the doorway in his white coat, a patient chart in one hand, the other hand hanging uselessly at his side, like a man who had just walked into a room and discovered gravity worked differently here. The color left his face, so fast it was almost artistic. Neither of us moved, neither of us breathed. For a moment, the only sounds in the room were the rhythmic beeping of the fetal monitor and the hum of the heating vent overhead. Then my best friend, Simone, broke the silence the way only she could. "Oh, you have got to be absolutely kidding me." "My name is Claire Whitman, Claire Navarro now. I went back to my maiden name the week after the divorce finalized. I'm 39 years old. I'm a former Army logistics officer. I survived 2 deployments, 1 IED blast that took out our convoy's lead vehicle, 3 commanding officers who made poor decisions under pressure, and more bureaucratic disasters than I care to count. None of that prepared me for this night. I had thought, during the months of preparation, during the careful documentation and the legal consultations and the very deliberate construction of my independent life, that I had mentally rehearsed every scenario. What I would feel at Noah's birth, what I would say if Cole somehow found out, how I would handle the conversation when it inevitably came. I had not rehearsed this, the specific reality of laboring through the hardest night of my life, while the man who should have been beside me for it stood frozen in a doorway looking at me like I was a ghost. Some things resist rehearsal. But I need to back up, because if you're going to understand why Cole standing in that doorway mattered so much, why the room felt like it had tilted 15 degrees to the left, you need to understand what came before it. You need to understand the years. Cole and I met at a charity gala in Nashville. He was volunteering with a surgical outreach program. I was representing a military family welfare initiative. He was the kind of man who listened when you talked, who remembered small details you didn't realize you'd shared, who laughed easily and without performance. Our first conversation lasted until the event staff started stacking chairs around us. We got married 11 months later, in October, in a small vineyard ceremony with 40 people and a borrowed flower arch. It was imperfect and sincere and exactly what I wanted. The first 2 years of our marriage were genuinely good. Not the Instagram version of good, the real version. We argued about kitchen organization. We disagreed about road trip playlists. We stayed up too late talking about things that didn't matter and also things that mattered enormously. We were building something. I remember a specific Saturday in our first year. We were painting the spare bedroom, the room we'd privately designated as the future nursery, though neither of us said that out loud yet, as if saying it might jinx something. We had paint in our hair and were disagreeing about whether the color we'd chosen looked more sage or more gray in the afternoon light. Cole said sage. I said gray. We stood there for 10 minutes pointing at the wall, in the serious way of people who have decided this is a very important question. Eventually, I admitted it looked a little of both. He said, "That's called compromise. We should do more of that." I said, "Don't get philosophical about paint." He laughed so hard he knocked the tray. We cleaned it up together, still arguing about the color. That was us, at our best, 2 people who disagreed easily and recovered easily and always came back to each other afterward. I missed that version of us for a long time. Then we started trying for a baby. And that's when everything began to quietly unravel. Month after month, test after test, every negative result arrived like a small stone being placed on your chest, light at first, then heavier, then difficult to breathe beneath. I did everything right. I tracked every cycle. I took every supplement. I scheduled every appointment, followed every dietary recommendation, read every medical study I could get my hands on. Logistics was my profession. If there was a protocol to follow, I followed it precisely. My tests came back normal, everything functioning exactly as it should. I called Cole from the parking lot of my doctor's office. Everything on my end looks good. You should schedule your panel. A pause. Yeah, I'll get to it. He didn't, not right away. There was always something. A demanding surgery week, an insurance complication, a scheduling conflict that somehow never resolved itself. Weeks became months. I stopped asking as directly. I told myself he was under pressure, that I was being impatient, that these things took time. I was very good at finding reasons to wait. And then there was Margaret. Cole's mother, Margaret Whitman. If you have ever met a woman who can deliver a devastating insult, wrapped so carefully in concern that the victim thanks her afterward, you understand Margaret. She was precise. She was relentless. And she had decided, long before she met me, that Cole deserved someone else. That someone else had a name, Paige Caldwell. Paige was lovely. She genuinely was a pediatric nurse, soft-spoken, always perfectly put together, never said an unkind word. The problem was never Paige. The problem was that Margaret used her the way you use a measuring stick, and I was always coming up short. Some women simply aren't built for domestic life, Margaret said once, over Sunday dinner, while looking directly at the centerpiece. Some women prioritize achievement over family, she said another time, smiling warmly at nothing in particular. Paige would be a wonderful mother, she said at Easter, to no one and everyone simultaneously. Cole would change the subject. He would squeeze my hand under the table. He would say, afterward, she doesn't mean anything by it. That's just how she is. But here is the thing nobody tells you about that kind of slow erosion. It doesn't feel like damage while it's happening. It feels like weather, like something you simply endure. Until one day you look in the mirror and realize the person looking back at you has been quietly apologizing for existing for the last 3 years. The worst moment came on a Sunday afternoon in April. I was running late to a family lunch at Margaret's house, and I walked through the back door without knocking, the way I always did. Margaret didn't hear me come in. She was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and curt. Cole needs to face the truth. Claire is never going to give him a family. It's simply not who she is. Women like her, they're built for other things, not for this. I stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time. Then I walked back out the way I came, sat in my car, and drove to a pharmacy 2 towns over to buy a bottle of water because I needed something to do with my hands. That evening, after dinner, I asked Cole if he would ever tell his mother to stop. He looked at me carefully. She loves you, Claire. She just expresses it strangely. I stared at him. That's not an answer. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't want to create more conflict. And that was the moment I understood. Not that Cole was a bad person. He wasn't. But he was never going to choose the harder thing when the easier thing was available. And protecting me had always been the harder thing. 2 months later, I asked him for a separation. He didn't fight it. That hurt more than the fighting would have. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday morning in February. I signed the paperwork, shook hands with my attorney, walked to my car, and called Simone. It's done, I said. Come over, she said. I have wine and absolutely no interest in being reasonable about any of this. I laughed for the first time in weeks. I drove to Fort Campbell, where I was still stationed, and I tried to figure out who I was now that I wasn't half of something. 6 weeks after the divorce, I passed out during a briefing. One moment, I was standing in front of a projected map, explaining a supply chain complication. The next, I was on the floor looking up at a ceiling I didn't recognize, with 3 junior officers staring at me like I'd announced the apocalypse. Ma'am, do you need? I'm fine, I said, which was an objectively terrible assessment of the situation. At the base medical clinic, a doctor named Patricia Ose set down her tablet, folded her hands and said, Captain Navarro, you're pregnant. I stared at her. She waited. I stared at her some more. I heard you, I finally said. I just need a moment to catch up. She smiled gently. Take all the time you need. I sat in that exam room for 20 minutes after she left. Not moving, not crying, just processing. Because here was the reality. I had spent 3 years believing my body was the problem. 3 years tracking and testing and wondering. 3 years absorbing Margaret's quiet campaign of blame. And now, 6 weeks after walking away from that marriage, my body had quietly done the thing we'd spent years trying to make happen. The cruelty of the timing was genuinely breathtaking. I drove home in silence, sat in my driveway, watched a neighbor's cat cross the street with tremendous confidence, and tried to decide what to do with the most significant information I had ever held. Should I tell Cole? The question kept me awake for 11 nights. Part of me said yes, obviously, immediately. He had a right to know. That was the responsible thing, the decent thing, the legally uncomplicated thing. But then I would close my eyes and hear Margaret's voice in that kitchen hallway. Women like her, not for this. And I would think about all the ways telling Cole meant telling Margaret. All the ways my pregnancy would stop being private and become a property dispute. A courtroom, a church discussion, a referendum on my character delivered by a woman who had decided my verdict years ago. I was 8 weeks pregnant and already exhausted. I wasn't equipped to fight that war while also growing a person. So I made a different choice. I documented everything: appointment records, conception timeline estimates, communication logs, medical reports. I built a file the way I used to build mission briefs, thorough, organized, defensible. Simone helped. She wasn't entirely comfortable with the decision, but she was entirely loyal to me, which meant she helped anyway. If this ever becomes a legal matter, she said one evening, watching me label folders, you will be the most prepared woman in the history of family court. That's the goal, I said. She handed me another folder. You're a little terrifying. I know. The pregnancy itself was its own adventure. Nobody tells you what it's like to be pregnant in your late 30s while still serving, while navigating a divorce, while pretending to your chain of command that everything is fine. My knees, already damaged from years of military service, ached constantly. My energy, usually reliable and abundant, became something I had to ration carefully. I cried at a car insurance commercial in month 4 and then spent 10 minutes deeply disturbed by my own reaction. Simone was there for all of it. She drove me to appointments, sat in waiting rooms, talked me through the 2 a.m. spirals, brought me specific food I didn't know I needed until she was already handing it to me. She was the kind of friend who shows up before you ask, which is the only kind of friend that actually counts. One afternoon in my 7th month, she drove me to a diner near the base for breakfast food at dinner time, because that was what I wanted, and she understood the assignment. The waitress who seated us, a woman named Carol, 50s, kind face, paused when she heard my last name during some administrative small talk about a rewards card. Navarro, she said slowly, you were married to Dr. Whitman, weren't you? I kept my expression neutral. I was. She looked like she was carrying something uncomfortable. I used to work at a medical practice in Franklin, administrative side. A pause. I probably shouldn't say anything. Then don't, I said pleasantly. She nodded, started to walk away, then stopped. If you ever end up in a legal situation, custody, anything like that, make sure whoever represents you knows to ask very specific questions about medical history. She met my eyes briefly, that's all. She walked away before I could respond. Simone and I sat in silence for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, Claire. I know. He knew. I know. I picked up my fork, set it back down, picked it up again. We don't know that for certain. Claire. I know, I exhaled slowly, I know. We didn't finish our food. I called my attorney the next morning. Monica Chen was exactly the kind of lawyer you want in your corner, methodical, relentless, allergic to sentimentality, and the type who remembered every detail of your case without needing to reference notes. I had found her through a colleague who'd been through a difficult custody situation and described Monica as the person you want on your side if things get complicated. I had not known, when I first called her, how complicated things were going to get. I explained what Carol had implied. Monica listened without interrupting, which was one of her finest qualities. When I finished, there was a brief pause that I had learned meant she was organizing information rather than hesitating. If he underwent testing, there will be records, she said. Medical records can be legally subpoenaed during custody proceedings if they're relevant to the case. We'll request them if it becomes necessary. And if they show what I think they might show, then they become relevant. A pause, and the picture changes. I hung up, looked at the wall for a while, then went back to building my file, because the military had taught me that you don't prepare for the battle you hope to fight. You prepare for the one that's actually coming. Which brings me back to 3:22 in the morning. The contraction hit like a wave breaking over a seawall. I squeezed the bed rail and tried to breathe the way the classes had taught me, which in the moment felt entirely theoretical. Simone, who had been awake with me for 6 hours, and showed absolutely no signs of slow. Down pressed a cup of ice chips into my free hand. You're doing great. I'm dying, I said. You're not dying, dying looks different. How would you know? I've seen all the movies. A small laugh escaped me, which immediately got interrupted by another contraction, which felt like cruel timing. The door opened, and Cole walked in with a patient chart and the expression of a man whose entire understanding of reality had just quietly collapsed. He stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds without moving. 3 seconds is a long time when every person in a room is watching you. The nurses paused. Simone went very still. I stared at him from the bed, sweating, exhausted, 38 weeks along, and absolutely unprepared for this particular moment despite having had 8 months to prepare for every other aspect of this situation. Cole swallowed. Lee, he said, then caught himself because I'd gone back to my maiden name, Claire. Cole, I said. The nursing staff looked between us the way people look at a car accident, with genuine concern mixed with the uncomfortable awareness that they are witnessing something private. A nurse named Priya stepped forward. Dr. Whitman, the patient's blood pressure has been trending upward. Baby's heart rate dipped twice in the last hour. She handed him the chart. And here is the thing about Cole Whitman that I had always, despite everything, genuinely respected. When there was a medical situation in front of him, he became something else. The personal chaos in his eyes didn't disappear, but it moved aside. Professional precision walked in and took the wheel. He read the chart, his jaw tightened, he looked at the monitor. How long have you been contracting? About 7 hours. 7 hours, he looked at me. You waited 7 hours. I wasn't waiting, I said. I was being realistic about hospital parking. Simone snorted. The nurse covered her mouth. Cole did not smile, but something flickered in his eyes briefly. Her pressure. Priya rattled off the numbers. Cole's expression shifted into something that was all doctor and no ex-husband. We need to watch this carefully. He looked at Priya. Let's get Dr. Morrison in here. I'll need to step back as primary. Of course. He glanced at me one more time. The math was happening behind his eyes. I could practically see it. 38 weeks. The divorce had been final for 8 months. He was doing arithmetic with his face. Claire. Not now, I said. There is a human being trying to exit my body. We'll talk later. He nodded once, stepped back, and to his credit, did exactly what the situation required. He got out of the way of the medical team while staying close enough to be useful. Dr. Rachel Morrison arrived 15 minutes later, a no-nonsense ob who shook my hand firmly and said, I hear tonight's been eventful. Let's meet your baby. The next several hours were the hardest of my life. I won't pretend otherwise. There is nothing cinematic about the reality of labor. It is loud and physical, and it demands everything you have and then asks for more. Simone didn't leave my side once. She held my hand through every contraction, fed me ice, threatened a nurse with creative consequences when the epidural took longer than promised, and at one point leaned close to whisper, if you don't make it, I'm naming him after myself. His name is already chosen, I managed. Fine middle name. Absolutely not. You're so difficult during labor. I gripped her hand harder during the next one, and she didn't complain. Cole stayed in the room. Not as my physician, Dr. Morrison had that handled, but he stayed. Near the window mostly, quiet, out of the way. I was aware of him without looking at him, which was a strange sensation, like knowing exactly where a storm is without being in it yet. Dawn arrived. The sky outside the window went from black to deep navy to a thin gray light that didn't quite qualify as morning yet. And then, at 6:47 a.m., after one final push that I am genuinely uncertain I survived. A cry. Clear and sharp, and absolutely furious, the way new things often are when they first encounter the world. My son. I have tried, several times, to find the right words for that moment. I'm not sure they exist in any language I speak. I only know that every difficult thing, every negative test, every Sunday dinner, every silent car ride home, every night I spent wondering what was wrong with me, all of it compressed into something very small and very far away, and what remained was just this. A tiny, red-faced, impossibly real person being placed against my chest, and the complete and total reorganization of every priority I had ever held. I cried immediately, completely, without any of the dignity I had maintained throughout an entire difficult night. Simone cried. Dr. Morrison blinked several times with great professional composure. And Cole. Cole stood across the room with my son in his arms for one brief moment before carrying him to me. And I watched his face during that moment. I watched the careful, controlled surgeon's expression fracture into something unguarded and raw, because my son had Cole's eyes, that particular shade of gray-blue that I had once loved to look at. He had Cole's chin, the specific line of it. He had Cole's ears. He looked like a Whitman portrait done in miniature, fresh and unvarnished. Cole looked at him, then looked again, as if his eyes were asking his brain to confirm what he was seeing. His hands trembled, just slightly, I noticed. He brought my son to me, laid him carefully against my chest, stepped back. For a long, suspended moment, nobody in that room made a sound. Then Cole spoke, barely above a whisper. Claire. Don't, I said. I just need to. Not now, I looked down at my son. This moment is not about you. He was quiet. The room slowly cleared. Nurses finished their documentation, checked monitors, moved with the efficient purpose of people who have witnessed births before and understand the rhythm of it. Dr. Morrison stopped by to check on me before leaving, gave me a genuine smile, and said, "He's perfect. Well done." Eventually, it was just Simone, Cole, my son, and me. Is he mine? Cole asked it quietly, directly, looking at the floor first, then at me. I looked at my son. Tiny mouth, tiny fist curled against his cheek, the terrifyingly complete smallness of a new person. Then I looked at Cole. This is not the conversation we're having right now. Claire, please. No, my voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. You walked out of my life. You let me carry shame that didn't belong to me. You stood silent in room after room while your mother dismantled my self-worth and called it concern. You don't get to walk back in at 6 in the morning and have the most important conversation of your life before I've even slept. I looked back at my son. Through attorneys. Through attorneys, I looked up. That's the answer. Cole looked hollowed out. Part of me recognized that. Part of me had felt exactly that hollowed out, many times, and had not received anywhere near this level of consideration about it. He left shortly after. Simone waited until the door closed, then exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. You okay? She asked. No, I said. Ask me again in a few months. She sat back down beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. What's his name? I looked down at my son, Noah. She smiled. Hey Noah, she said softly, you've already had a very full morning. Later that day, I received a visitor I hadn't requested. Margaret arrived in church clothes despite it being mid-morning, which told me she had dressed specifically for this. She never left things to chance, including first impressions. Behind her, to my genuine surprise, was Paige Caldwell. I hadn't expected Paige. We had always been politely distant strangers, two people positioned against each other by someone who enjoyed the arrangement, and yet she had never done anything unkind to me directly. My feelings about her were complicated in a way that mostly resolved to, she's decent and none of this is her fault. She looked uncomfortable from the moment she walked in. I respected that. Margaret looked at Noah with the expression of a person attempting neutrality about something that is unraveling their certainty. Because Noah, even at less than 12 hours old, was unmistakably a Whitman. The specific gray-blue of his eyes, that chin. Simone had pointed to it within an hour of birth and said, I don't think Cole had a lot of genetic competition in there. Margaret gathered herself with the practiced composure of someone who has managed difficult rooms for decades. She sat down, smoothed her jacket, and immediately began discussing DNA testing in the same measured tone she would use for a church committee agenda item. These things happen, she said, which in translation meant, I will not accept this until I am formally compelled to. He's beautiful, Paige said, quietly and sincerely. Congratulations, Claire. I thanked her and meant it. Margaret pivoted to implications. She was skilled at implications, they were her primary weapon, and she had sharpened them over decades. But I was 8 months past the point where implications landed. Everything going forward goes through attorneys, I said simply. That includes any questions about paternity, visitation, and your role in Noah's life. Cole will communicate whatever we agree on. She looked at me. That's not an opening for discussion, I said. It's just how things are. Paige put a hand briefly on Margaret's arm. We should let her rest, she said. They left. Simone looked at the closed door for a long moment. Paige Caldwell might genuinely be a decent person, she said. She always was, I said. She just got recruited into someone else's story. Like you. Like me, I looked at Noah. I just eventually resigned. The hospital records confirmed it 3 months later. Monica called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting on the floor of my living room sorting through Noah's laundry, which is, as it turns out, a disproportionate amount of laundry for someone who weighs 11 pounds, with Noah in a bouncy seat beside me, making the expression he made when he was thinking very seriously about something. We received the requested records, Monica said. I went still and... Cole underwent fertility testing 14 months before your divorce finalized. A pause. The results indicated concerns regarding motility. The attending physician recommended follow-up assessment. Did he do the follow-up? No. I closed my eyes. There it was, the thing I had suspected since that diner conversation, the thing I had spent months half hoping wasn't true. 14 months before the divorce, while I was still tracking cycles and taking supplements and sitting in parking lots crying over negative tests, while Margaret was making gentle implications at Sunday dinners, while I was asking myself, quietly and constantly, what was wrong with me. He had known there might be something to examine, and he had examined nothing, because examining it would have required facing it, and facing it would have meant acknowledging that the narrative, the one where I was the problem, the one his mother had built so carefully, was wrong. Claire, Monica said. I'm here, my voice was remarkably even considering, what happens next? He's already filed for parental rights. The DNA test will be straightforward given the timeline. After that, custody and child support proceedings. Okay. Are you all right? I looked at Noah. He had grabbed his own foot and was staring at it with the focused amazement of someone encountering feet for the first time. I think so, I said. I think I've actually been carrying this for so long that knowing it is a relief. That happens, she said gently. After the call, I sat quietly for a while. Noah eventually tired of his foot and looked at me instead, which he did frequently and with great seriousness, as if compiling important research. Your dad knew, I told him, not everything but enough. I adjusted his tiny sock. We're going to be fine anyway. He blinked at me, then smiled, not a real smile yet, too early for that, but the involuntary muscle movement that new babies make that looks enough like a smile to completely undo you. I laughed, and then, unexpectedly, I cried, but the good kind, the kind that releases something rather than adding to it. The invitation arrived on a Saturday. A community recognition banquet hosted by Whitman's church. Veterans, local volunteers, community leaders. The kind of event that feels obligatory and usually ends in sheet cake and small talk. I was about to throw it in the recycling. Then I saw the program insert. Special recognition, Margaret Whitman, Women's Leadership and Community Mentorship Award. I read it twice. Then I called Simone. She arrived 20 minutes later, read the program insert, and said, "Oh, we're absolutely going." "We are not going." "Claire." "It would be petty." "It would be accurate." She sat down across from me. "How many people at that church still think you're the reason your marriage failed?" I didn't answer. How many of them have heard 3 years of Margaret's version of this story? Still didn't answer. And how many of them are going to sit in that banquet hall on Saturday night and applaud a woman receiving a mentorship award for behavior that... "All right," I said. She stopped. "All right, we're going." The banquet was held in the church fellowship hall on a Friday evening in October. The kind of evening that reminds you fall exists for a reason, cool and clear, the air carrying something like relief after a long summer. I wore my dress uniform. Military families were being recognized, which gave me a legitimate reason. Also, and I will admit this, it fit better than anything civilian I owned that could qualify as formal, and I looked good in it. That was relevant information. Noah wore a tiny blue outfit Simone had selected, with what I can only describe as excessive joy. He looked absurd and wonderful. The fellowship hall was everything I remembered. Folding tables, white tablecloths, sweet tea in pitchers, a table of casseroles that required strong community trust to navigate, veterans near the front, church ladies in coordinated cardigans, the smell of pot roast and floor wax. Margaret spotted me within 90 seconds. She crossed the room with a smile that arrived before anything else, the way a weather front arrives before the rain. "Claire," a hug that was technically a hug, "I didn't know you were coming." It was a recent decision. Her eyes dropped to Noah. Something moved across her face, a complicated thing, partly surprise, partly recognition, because even at 4 months old, Noah was undeniably a Whitman. The chin, the eyes, the specific shape of his ears. She recovered with impressive speed. "Well, look at him." "Yes," I said, "he does look like something, doesn't he?" The smile stayed in place. Technically, babies change so much in the first months. "Some things don't change," I said pleasantly. She moved on to other guests. Simone appeared at my elbow. "Round one to you." It wasn't a round, it was a greeting. Looked like a round to me. She took Noah from my arms. "Go eat something, you have that look." "What look?" "The one that means you haven't eaten since this morning." She was right. I got a plate of pot roast. The evening moved through its expected rhythms. Dinner, announcements, award presentations. The military recognition segment was genuinely moving. A World War II veteran's grandson accepted a posthumous honor, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room, mine included. Then Margaret took the podium. She was good at this. I will never deny that. She had a natural authority behind a microphone, a warmth in her voice that audiences responded to instinctively. She thanked the church leadership, the volunteers, the community members who had supported her various initiatives over the years. It was gracious and well-delivered, and received with genuine appreciation. And then it shifted, slowly, the way it always did with her. "A strong community," she said, smiling at the audience, "is built by women who understand their calling." Heads nodded. "Not every woman," she continued, "is built for the same path. Some women are called to achievement, to recognition, to careers, a meaningful pause, but the women who truly hold families together, they understand that some things matter more than medals." The room was warm and quiet and receptive. I sat very still. True mentorship means helping younger women see what actually matters, not what the world tells us matters, what we know in our hearts to be true. She did not look at me, she never needed to. I looked at Simone, she was watching me. I looked at Cole, he was at a table near the front, looking at the tablecloth. And I thought about 3 years of Sunday dinners. 3 years of sitting at tables like this one, listening to words like these ones, absorbing the cumulative weight of a story someone else was writing about me. 3 years of hoping the person who should have protected me would notice. Then I looked at Noah, asleep in Simone's arms, perfect and oblivious and entirely innocent of everything that had come before him. I thought about what he would inherit. Not money, not property, what he would inherit, the version of his mother he would come to know. A woman who stayed quiet, or a woman who told the truth when it mattered. I stood up. Simone's eyes went wide. I moved toward the stage with a steadiness that surprised me. Pastor Alan Graham, a decent man who had always been slightly afraid of his most prominent parishioner, looked startled when I approached. "Captain Navarro," he said, "this is." "I won't take long," I said, "I promise." He hesitated, then, perhaps recognizing something in my expression, stepped back. I took the microphone. The room had gone very quiet, the way rooms do when something unscripted happens. I looked out at the faces, familiar ones, half-familiar ones I'd seen across Sunday tables and holiday gatherings and 4 years of attempts to become part of this community. "My name is Claire Navarro," I said. "Some of you know me as Colonel Whitman's ex-wife. Some of you know me as the woman who couldn't give him children." I paused. "I'd like to talk about that second one." Margaret stepped forward. "Claire." "I'll only take a few minutes," I said it calmly, not aggressively, just firmly. "I appreciate your patience." She stopped. "I spent several years believing something was wrong with me," I said. "I did everything that was asked of me, medically speaking. I followed every protocol. I attended every appointment. I tracked every relevant data point, which I added, is what happens when a logistics officer applies her professional skills to her personal life." A few people smiled. And during all of that time, during all of those years, I absorbed the narrative that I was the problem, that my body was failing, that I was failing. I kept my voice even. That narrative was not accidental. Margaret's expression had shifted. The public warmth had not left her face entirely. She was too practiced for that, but something beneath it had gone still. "I have a voicemail on my phone," I said. "I've kept it for 2 years. I want to play it tonight, not because I want to embarrass anyone, but because I think the people in this room deserve to hear the truth." Pastor Graham looked like he was experiencing something close to a medical episode. I pressed play. Margaret's voice came through the phone speaker, clear and composed, and utterly cold beneath its surface warmth. "Cole needs to stop pretending this is going to work out. That woman is never going to give him a family. I've done the research. Women like her, whatever she survived over there, it's changed her. Some women just aren't made for this, and the kindest thing anyone can do be honest about it. He deserves more than what she can offer." The recording ended. The fellowship hall was absolutely silent. Not uncomfortable silence, reckoning silence, the kind that descends when a room full of people simultaneously revises their understanding of something. An older man near the front, a veteran, 3 rows back, slowly shook his head. A woman in a blue cardigan put down her fork. Margaret opened her mouth. "That recording doesn't." "I know what it does and doesn't do," I said quietly, "but so does everyone in this room now. And that's enough." I moved to hand the microphone back to Pastor Graham. And then, from the front of the room, I heard a chair scrape. I turned. Cole was standing. He had been sitting with his head slightly lowered, the way he did when he was processing something difficult. Now he was on his feet. His face was very pale. His hands were at his sides. Every person in the room looked at him. "She's right," he said. Margaret said, "Cole. Mom, quiet, firm, please." The room waited. I knew, he said, not everything, but enough. He exhaled slowly. I had testing done over a year before our divorce. There were concerns on my side. I was told to follow up. I didn't, because following up would have meant admitting that the story I was letting exist wasn't true. His voice was steady but barely. I let my wife carry blame that I should have examined. I let her believe the problem was her when I wasn't willing to find out if it was me. And I let my mother say things. He stopped. I let her say things because saying nothing was easier than the alternative. Nobody in the room moved. I'm sorry, he said. He was looking at me. I'm deeply, genuinely sorry. That doesn't change anything tonight. But it's the truth, and it should have been said a long time ago. Margaret looked at her son, as if she were seeing a stranger wearing his face. Pastor Graham stepped quietly forward, as pastors do when a situation has arrived at its natural conclusion and requires a gentle landing. I think perhaps we should take a moment. Nobody disagreed. The banquet ended not long after that. Not with drama, not with shouting or tears or anything that would look good in a scene. Just with a room full of people gathering their things more quietly than they'd arrived, speaking in murmurs, moving toward their cars with the thoughtful expressions of people who have been asked to reconsider something they thought they already understood. I stood outside in the October air. Noah was awake now, blinking at the parking lot lights with the fascinated attention he brought to everything. Simone stood beside me. She had not said anything for a while, which was unusual for her, and which meant she was actually thinking rather than just talking. How do you feel? She asked eventually. I thought about it. Lighter, I said, which is strange because I expected to feel more. What were you expecting? I don't know, triumph maybe, victory. And instead it just feels like, done, like something finished. She nodded, that's probably better. I heard footsteps on the pavement behind me and didn't need to turn to know who it was. Cole stopped a few feet away. He looked like a man who had recently had a significant amount of weight lifted off him against his will, which left him uncertain where to stand. I meant what I said in there. I know. I'm not asking for anything. He looked at Noah. I know I'm not in a position to ask for anything. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did, what I allowed. I looked at him for a moment. You were never a bad person, Cole, I said. You were a person who consistently chose the easier thing. Those aren't the same, but they're also not harmless. He nodded slowly. What do you need from me? He asked, going forward with Noah. Show up, I said, not when it's easy. Consistently. Every scheduled visit, every important moment, every ordinary Tuesday, that's what he needs. Not gestures, not grand apologies, Tuesdays. Okay. And your mother doesn't have unsupervised access until I decide otherwise. He paused, then nodded, okay. Those aren't negotiating positions, I added. Those are facts. I understand. Simone made a small sound beside me that might have been approval. Noah made a small sound that might have been agreement. Cole looked at Noah for a long moment. Something in his face was very quiet, very careful. He's incredible, he said softly. Yes, I agreed, he is. That was 11 months ago. Noah is walking now. Unsteadily, with the confidence of someone who has not yet learned that falling down is something to be concerned about. He says 4 words, mama, more, dog, and something that is either Simone or a sound that Simone has decided means Simone. He laughs at ceiling fans and is suspicious of carrots, and has an opinion about everything, all of which he expresses loudly and without apology. He is the best thing that has ever happened to me. I know every parent say. That, I understand now why every parent says that. Cole comes every week. Not perfectly, no one is perfect, but consistently, which is what I asked for and what I am watching carefully. He brings Noah small things, a wooden train, a soft book with animals in it, once an entire felt vegetable set that I suspect Simone influenced. He sits on my living room floor and narrates their activities with the serious attention he brings to complex cases. It's awkward sometimes. The conversation between us still carries echoes. But there is something being built there, not between Cole and me. That door is closed between Cole and his son. Something that, if tended carefully, will matter enormously to Noah in ways neither of us can fully predict yet. I watch it happen and I feel something complicated about it. Not regret, not longing, something closer to hope, actually. The specific hope that my son will have a father who shows up. Tuesdays, that was the word I used. He has not missed one. Margaret attended a family mediation session 2 months ago, which was about as comfortable as you would expect, and probably less comfortable than she expected. She's a woman who has spent decades operating from a position of social authority, and the mediation room did not extend that authority to her. She sat across a table and was required to speak plainly and be held accountable for plain speech, which is a very different experience from delivering implications over Sunday lunch. She did not apologize in any form that I would recognize as an apology. She reframed. She contextualized. She referenced her own difficult life experiences in ways that were meant to generate sympathy and mostly generated impatience from Monica, who had seen this before. I didn't need her apology. I want to be clear about that. I was not sitting in that mediation room waiting for Margaret Whitman to admit she was wrong, because I have learned something important about certain people. The admission would cost her so much that it would never come in a form that actually helped me, and I didn't need it to. What I needed was the boundary. The documented, legally acknowledged, professionally witnessed boundary that she would not have unsupervised access to Noah until I determined otherwise. That was what I was there for. She understood, by the end of that session, that I was not someone she could manage anymore. That might be the closest thing to an apology I'll ever receive from her, and I have made my peace with that. Simone bought Noah a miniature leather jacket last week, which I told her was excessive and ridiculous. He wore it for 4 hours and looked magnificent in it. I'm still in Nashville, still serving, in a new capacity that keeps me largely stateside. My knees hurt when it rains. I drink too much coffee. I watch Noah sleep sometimes with the specific amazement of someone who cannot believe this is real. Some mornings I still grieve the marriage I thought I was building. I'm not sure that ever entirely stops. But grief and peace can live in the same house, I've learned. They don't have to be enemies. You just learn which room each one belongs in. I've thought a lot since the banquet about what victory actually looks like in situations like this, because people expect it to look a certain way. Dramatic and loud. A moment of clear triumph, a defeated villain, a crowd that finally understands. But the real shift happened much earlier. It happened the night I sat on my kitchen floor surrounded by documents and decided to stop waiting for someone to rescue me. It happened when I called Monica and said I want answers. It happened every appointment I attended alone, every record I kept, every boundary I drew before anyone was watching. The banquet was just the moment the truth stopped being private. Truth doesn't need an audience to matter. It just needs to be true. My son will grow up knowing this, that his mother was not the problem, and that being told you're less than you are is not a sentence you're required to serve. He'll know that showing up matters more than grand gestures. He'll know that love without respect is just a story told about love. And he'll know that the person who never stopped believing in his existence, long before he was born, long before his father stood in a delivery room and went pale with recognition, was his mother. Who documented everything. Who built the file. Who stood up at the right moment. And then came home to fold laundry. If this story stayed with you, I want to ask you something. Not whether you think I made the right choices. I've stopped needing people to validate my choices. I want to ask what you would have protected if you were in that position. What you would have been unwilling to give up. Because every person who survives something like this makes a decision, somewhere in the middle of it, about what matters enough to fight for. For me, it was simple by the end. It was Noah. It was always Goy. NG to be Noah. And if you're someone who has spent years carrying blame that was never yours, if you've been sitting in parking lots and Sunday dinners and quiet rooms wondering what's wrong with you, wondering why you aren't enough, I want you to hear this. The weight you've been carrying might not belong to you. It might have been placed there by someone who needed a place to set something down. You don't have to keep holding it. The day I put it down was the day everything changed. Not the day of the banquet, not the day of the DNA results, not even the morning Noah was born. The day I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by documents, and decided to stop asking for permission to protect myself. That was the day. And if you're waiting for someone to tell you that you're allowed to do that, to stop, to document, to say no, to walk toward the truth instead of away from it, consider this your permission. You never needed it from anyone else. You only needed to give it to yourself.